delighted that you've custom built this presentation for us tonight. And I think you said you wanted to make it pretty interactive. So I'm sure that we'll have lots of questions and interactivity for you tonight. Thank you so much for making the time.
From local spots to far off adventures, I want to talk a little bit about, firstly, just who we are really quickly, in case people don't know, but then talk about fishing Ontario close to home. How do you find kind of spots that, could be your new favorite spot? What do you look for in terms of new water? I know it can be kind of daunting or also just kind of like off-putting when you're like, well, I want to go find some water that doesn't have lots of anglers. I want to go fish somewhere that a lot of people aren't fishing. But I don't want to waste my time, So we'll talk a little bit about that, how to find the right kind of water. Then we'll talk about driving in your car to get to fishing spots that are a little further, a little bit more of an adventure. I know a lot of the people on this call do adventures in Northern Ontario already. So please add your stories. And then we'll talk about a train trip. You can take a train to go fly fishing in Northern Ontario, which is super cool. And then finally, float planes. I mean, obviously, float planes are the like the best thing you can do in terms of an adventure in Ontario. And I want to talk about like probably the most accessible version of that when it comes to incredible fishing and taking a float plane trip. But yeah, just really quickly, I just wanted to, cover off the fact that we're SoFly. We're a fly fishing podcast. We're based in Toronto. Although can't be here tonight, but this is him. He loves tacos and bonefish. These days in the winter, he seems to be just chasing salt more than anything. He grew up in Ottawa. So did I. But we didn't actually meet until we both came to Toronto. If he was a fly, we like to have this in the podcast. If you're a fly, what would you be? If he was a fly, being a sable wolf. I'm Mitch. I love bamboo. I love walleye. Very Ontario of me, I know. Like I said, I grew up in Ottawa as well. I worked at a fly fishing store there called Flow Paddle Fly in Canada, which was a really good shop when I was a kid. I've been fly fishing for 20 years. I love the podcast because it gives me an opportunity to meet, heroes of mine and talk about fly fishing with people and just kind of let the guards off and get to the root of the, what there is to love about fly fishing versus always talking about education. If I was a fly, being Adams, I love Adams. They're a great fly. Like I said, we didn't meet until 2017 in Toronto, which is super weird because the fly fishing scene in Ottawa was not huge and we're both around the same age, but I didn't even know Aldo existed. I knew other people from the shop he worked at in Ottawa, which was called Green Drake. It was a great Orvis store in Ottawa. Loved going there, an amazing fly tying section. A guy named Cam who just tied the most incredible flies and fished them on a Bing retreat. If you've ever been to Ottawa fly fishing, those are probably all keywords that are getting you really excited. But Aldo and I didn't meet until we were both in Toronto, and we've been doing the podcast for 8 years now, which is wild. And Yilma actually, who was a third co-host on the show, he just stepped back from the podcast this year. But he had done it, with us for 8 years, and we started the podcast in 2015, really. It's been a long time, but it's been a lot of fun. And it's been a lot of saying yes to things. And I think in Ontario, especially, just saying yes, because what we found was when we started doing the podcast, we wanted to get content. So it was like if we don't catch anything. And then it started being like people were taking notice and asking us if we wanted to go where they fish up north. And we said yes to that. It just unlocked all these doors. I'm sure like everybody here saying yes to things is good. And like I said, it's just like really made SoFly what it is. Yes, we've traveled now all over the world, which is wild to think about. It is a great time to do something creative because like it's more accessible than ever, like there's the internet, you can connect with people. It's easy to record yourself and put it out there and maybe people will enjoy it. And you can really like unlock cool stuff. You can really dive deep into Ontario and fishing in Ontario. But let's get into this beautiful, wonderful, amazing province and talk about the things that I love to do here. So like I said, I'm going to talk a little bit about like just finding those new local spots, give you some of the tips that I use. Then we're going to talk about specifically Temagami, which I know some of you have done and love. And then we're going to talk about Elk Lake Wilderness Resort. It's a great place. We're going to talk about Lodge 88, which is a train lodge, the lodge you could take a train into, which is further north. And then we're going to talk about Esnagami and Iwffc. Esnagami Lake is north of Thunder Bay. Amazing place. But first, let's talk about fishing local. Let's just sit on this picture for a sec because I'm just like, this has been a long winter, man. And I'm seeing a brown trout for the first time in a couple of days. I'm like, oh my God. I remember when Yilma caught that. That was on opener 2 years ago on a streamer. And I was just like, Geez, that's a nice fish, man. And these are the kind of fish you can catch in Ontario, which is just it's just crazy, man. Half an hour from Toronto on the Credit River. Okay, finding new water is kind of just about actually finding the physical water and going and exploring it, boots on the ground. Really, there's nothing that compares to that. I know with like the internet and like forums and like fly shops and all this stuff, we feel like we can get information, and that, you know, is great, but nothing beats just getting out and exploring something you're kind of interested in. On the right is like maybe my favorite example of that. That's Nick Kennedy, who owns the bar that we were talking about earlier, Civil Liberties in Toronto. One day Nick calls me and he says, "Do you want to go fish carp in the Humber River?" And I'm like, "Sure, why not?" It's like I live, you know, at Jane and Annette. The Humber River is right here in Toronto. Incredible fishery, steelhead, bass, you know, all kinds of stuff, and big carp. And I said, "Let's go do it. Let's just go down there and see what we can see." We kind of walked around the mouth of the Humber for a while. We didn't really see much that we could do because it, you know, the mouth of the Humber drops off and you're in Lake Ontario, right? So like we're like, okay, maybe this isn't right. So we just kind of walked a little bit and we saw this pond that came out of the Humber. Now this is like off like the garden. Okay, so you know, it's all good if you don't want to fish something like this. It's kind of a stormwater pond. It's kind of an overflow for the Humber, but we noticed carp rising in the pond, like actually hitting insects off the surface. And Nick said, "Okay, I'm going to try to catch whatever that is." We thought maybe it was a bass or something. He puts on a foam ant, makes like a 30-foot, 40-foot cast, and that carp hits the surface. So he caught that carp on a dry fly. And we were both freaking out. I didn't want to get in the water because, again, you know, it's kind of gross. But Nick was like in there, like super excited, and took this picture, released it. And then we saw in that pond even bigger fish, 10-pound carp, you know, swimming around in this pond. And that's right, like a couple minutes from our house. And that was just us saying, that water looks maybe kind of fishy, noticing the fish, and then we just fished it. Now we've got a potential carp spot, you know? So that's the biggest piece of advice I have, which again, like I said, I know it sounds obvious, but it's just go and see, because you never know. And give it a couple chances, because sometimes that spot might not be producing fish, you know, in the morning of that day or in the evening of that day. But then you go back in the afternoon and there's a ton of fish activity. So yeah, give it a chance. Getting out onto new water is the best way to explore and find new spots. But there's a few other things that I look for. And one of those big things is water near bigger water. That is like a big thing that I love to do, is find like this pond that's coming off the Humber, or there's a river, and then like 100 yards down, there's another river, a smaller creek. And I know that river's got really good trout. There's got to be something in that creek. Let's go check it out. And if it doesn't fish well, try it again and try it again. Look for active fish, like look for signs of life. Scope it out and go back time and time again. You'll be surprised. Another really good example of this is Idas, who is a photographer that joins us on a lot of fly fishing trips around Ontario. He has really made it his mission to pick apart the Humber River. The Humber River is, a lot of people overlook it. It gets a lot of pressure at Old Mill, but there's a ton of sections of the Humber that don't have a lot of fishing pressure, but they don't necessarily look great, and people don't want to spend their time there. Idas has picked it apart, and just like last weekend before, caught a 10-pound steelhead down the street, and then walked home, got a coffee. So fish close to home, find water that you're interested in, and just get boots on the ground and go after it. This is like one other example that I'd love to talk about. This is just outside of Ottawa. For years, I'd drive over this section of river, and never ever in my life have I seen someone fish it. And I've fished it for 20 years, 15 years now. It obviously looks quite fishy, but I didn't really realize around that bend, if you kept walking upriver, and this is the Mississippi River outside of Ottawa, it is like the most amazing smallmouth pike and walleye fishing. And this was just like, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go explore. And I did. And I found like one of my favorite fishing spots in Ottawa. And since then, like I said, I fished it for years. And this was just because I said, that looks good. And I tried it. And you know what? It was. It's kind of that simple. Looked like fishy water. I fished it, and it was very fishy. So yeah, just, don't overlook spots. If you see a piece of water that you think looks good, probably is, get boots on the ground and don't give up. And you're going to find water that you can fish that no one else is. And then one more tip is pulling up the maps. I mean, I've been doing this a little bit more recently, looking for things outside of, we fish the credit. There's no surprise there. The credit river's close to us in Toronto, and it's like an amazing fishery. I know everybody, we fish it a lot, but a lot of people fish a lot, and sometimes you can't fish it when it's too hot in the summer. So pull up Google Maps and just look for something. And if you find some water that looks decent, find the access and go and explore. Google Maps is a really, really useful tool. And I'm sure a lot of you guys are already doing this already, but again, it sounds obvious, but once you start looking, there's a lot of water out there. And because of all the water, and if you're willing to catch stuff like carp and bass, which you should be because it's awesome, and we got a lot of that, there's just so much to explore, like all of us probably fish different spots because there's so much to explore when it comes to warm water species. So yeah, Google Satellite is a great tool, 100%. You can really get into some serious adventure, and Chris knows that. John knows that. I know you guys do northern trips to Northern Ontario, which is kind of in my mind maybe the most beautiful place I've ever seen, Northern Ontario. Temagami is the first place we started exploring in 2016. Since then, we've really picked it apart. We've gotten to see some awesome bass, pike, walleye, trout water. It's about 4-ish hours, 5 hours from Toronto. And you can be in the middle of just like true wilderness, true Ontario wilderness. It kind of feels like, I know you pass North Bay and the gateway to the north sign, but Temagami really feels like that place in Ontario where things start to change and you start to get north. The trees, the air, the light, there's nothing feels quite like that in Ontario, at least nothing I've seen yet. It's super special. And obviously, just on that highway, it is kind of the first moment where you're like, man, we're starting to get north, and then from there on, it's like it gets serious. The trees get really short and the wolves get really big. But yes, Temagami, a lot of drive-in options. Also, obviously, huge paddle-in destination. Depending on what you want to do, you can kind of do either. Um, let's talk a little bit about where you can stay if you do go to Temagami, and you're just kind of doing drive-in trips or maybe renting like a canoe. Temagami Shores is great. It's a great spot. It's a nice little inn. They've got a restaurant. It's right on Lake Temagami. It's comfortable. It's clean. It's a beautiful place. And yeah, you can drive right up to it. It's right off the highway right before you get into the town of Temagami itself. Temagami Outfitting Co. is an outfitter that we've worked with since 2016. It was a friend of ours in Toronto named Eric Fankel, who opened Temagami Outfitting Co. to service Temagami in the greater region there in terms of canoe rentals, camping rentals, packs, food, sleeping bags. They have like everything you could possibly need to do a great trip in Temagami. They even have a barbecue restaurant now and a wicked patio right on the Lake Temagami there, and they shuttle. So if you want to go have a Temagami adventure, Eric is the guy to call and basically tell him your skill level, tell him what you're interested in, how long you want to go, and he'll help you plan out a trip within your budget, within your kind of like skill level again, and how much time you have, and you can really have a great time. It is just, apart from fishing, one of the most amazing paddling destinations. I'm sure you guys all know. Here's a couple shots from a trip that we do in the September kind of time frame. In the fall, we go to the Lady Evelyn system, which is a river in northern Temagami, and it's full of amazing brook trout. That picture of that brookie on the bottom left that our friend Tim caught last year is just like, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe there's fish like that in the river. Just amazing, true Ontario brook trout, beautiful fish, all on a fly rod. You spend, a week paddling this system, camping along the way, guided by Aldo there in the top right, and of course a Temagami Outfitting Co guide. Really good brook trout fishing. But yeah, the Lady Evelyn system's amazing. But then you can go a little bit further and you'll find Elk Lake. So Elk Lake is Temiskaming Shores. It's like another hour and a bit past Temagami. And this is a drive-in. This specific resort, Elk Lake Wilderness, is a drive-in, comfortable, wilderness lodge kind of style thing where they have, I think, 8 to 10 cabins you can rent. They've got full American plans, so food's taken care of and stuff like that. They're renovating the cabins too. It'd be really nice. So they're like brand new. It's right on the Montreal River. Montreal River is amazing fishing. Obviously, there's also countless rivers, lakes, ponds all around Elk Lake Wilderness Resort. And you can even rent ATVs in town and get into some backcountry lakes. But I mean, even just going on the Montreal River system and using one of the boats from Elk Lake to go and explore smallmouth bass or pike or walleye, I mean, you can fill your whole trip with just that. That bass right there was caught up at the falls. If you go right downriver on the Montreal River from Elk Lake Wilderness, and it was a massive fish early in the season, and Yilma was freaking out. This was last spring, and we took ATVs way down some mining roads in search of brook trout, and we did find them. That picture on the bottom middle was a culvert along the way where we stopped to catch pike who were feeding on suckers. And then in the bottom left there, this beautiful waterfall we found. There's a river coming off of a trout lake where we caught some brook trout, little guys, but they were just beautiful fish. And the top two images were a bigger lake that we thought had brook trout, but ended up just having a ton of really big sucker, which we had a lot of fun catching. Admittedly, did freak out when Yilma caught the first fish. Totally thought it was a huge walleye and it was a sucker, but still cool. But yes, Elk Lake Wilderness Resort, apart from Montreal River, has amazing opportunities in the backcountry, and ATVing in is always super fun. And so on the Montreal River, you can see they've got Lunds, they've got Legends, really nice boats outfitted for that river, 50 horse engines, super comfortable speakers, the whole thing, trolling motors on the front. And that's where you can really, open up and explore the river. It opens up into a place called Mountain Lake, which is where we caught, where we catch pike, tons of pike. It's a shallow kind of like not super deep lake, probably say like average 6 foot depths. And it's just got tons of pike cruising around. This is early in the season. I would be willing to guess later on it would be probably, easier to find the big fish once the water comes down a bit and the big weeds start to show up. But yeah, Elk Lake's amazing. Super easy, beautiful wildlife and scenery. And it's just so fun fishing from Lunds. I absolutely love it. But then you can do a trip like this if you want to get slightly more adventurous and take a train to go fishing. So I didn't do this trip, but this was a trip that Aldo and a couple other guys did last year, or the year before, to Lodge 88 and Marmac. So it's two different lodges on Esnagami Lake, and they're both again really comfortable, beautiful, like full lodge experiences where you can have food taken care of, all that kind of stuff. Essentially, what you do is you drive to White River. And from there, you get on the train. And the guys, and you can listen to the whole podcast, but it was really cool because everybody on that train is going into, this destination. And so people are there in the morning tying flies on board, and like everybody's really stoked because it's the start of a fishing trip, drinking coffee, talking about fishing. And then they pull you up basically to the shores of Esnagami Lake where you hop in some boats and they take you to 88 or Marmac, the two different lodges that operate there. Huge pike, lots of walleye. There's 40 kilometers of fishing from tip to tail of the lake. It's a huge, huge northern lake. There's brookies as well. But like a lot of these places, the brookies are kind of a little bit more of a walk to a smaller lake in the middle of the forest, which is kind of fun. It makes it more of an adventure going after brook trout when they're kind of like a walk into the woods in this special lake. But I found a lot of the time that's what the case is. You kind of have to go a little bit deeper into the freshwater, maybe where there are no pike, and you can get them. But yeah, it's a really beautiful, beautiful lodge, and it's just so northern Ontario. Those dark tannic waters, those kind of angry predatory fish. You're using big flies like that fire tiger in the top right. You're using big rods, 8, 9, 10 weights, and you're catching big fish like that top left fish that Nick, who I think spoken with you guys before, like Nick, amazing angler, amazing tire, amazing fish. Lodge 88 and Marmac definitely should be on your list. And like I said, taking a train in to go fishing is pretty neat. But nothing quite, trumps fishing trips like taking a plane to go fishing. I mean, it's kind of the coolest thing you can do. And in Ontario, it can really unlock some opportunities. Yeah. I mean, the first fly-in trip we ever did was to Attawapiskat, which blew our minds because like that year we started with Temagami and we thought we were going like, we're from Ottawa, we're from Toronto, we're going to Temagami. Wow, we're going 4 or 5 hours north. Like, couldn't believe how north we were going. We were like mind blown how north we were going. And then we went to Elk Lake. We're like, oh my God, it's another hour, And then it was like we contacted Hearst Air, which operates out of the town of Hearst, 10 hours northern Ontario. We said, can we go to the Sutton River? And if any of you guys know the Sutton River, it's like an amazing world-class brook trout fishery. And they have absolutely no problem selling trips to the Sutton River. And she's like, nope, you cannot go to the Sutton River because that trip has no problem selling trips. Like we absolutely are sold out for the next 3 years. But do you want to go to the Iwffc River? And we were immediately like, yes, 100%. So we drive 10 hours north to Hearst, Ontario. We hop on a plane, a turbo beaver, which you can see on the bottom kind of middle image there. Turbo beaver was actually in a museum at one point. They took it out and refurbished it, which was kind of weird. But anyways, we hopped on that plane, flew 2 hours north in the bottom left, seeing images of, really the north of Ontario. This is where you're seeing rivers that have never seen humans, like you're seeing wilderness it's just endless and amazing. And it feels very tundra. It feels very different from what you'd expect of Ontario. And then you land on this tiny kind of little, what feels like a small section of river on the Attawapiskat, and it's right by something called Pym Island. Pym Island was amazing. There was a cabin for the guests and a cabin for the guide. Norm, who's an Indigenous fella from Attawapiskat and Fort Albany, has been guiding on this river for 40 years. He knows every rock in the river, where it is, and he's just like seamlessly guiding us through this river so that we're not hitting a single rock. Of course, Aldo and I hit almost every rock in the river, and it was terrifying, but we also caught, the biggest pike we've ever seen in our lives. Now, if you're looking for a fly-in trip that's a bit more, less of an adventure in the same way, which this is kind of my speed. I love going to comfortable, affordable, but remote place like Esnagami Wilderness Resort. So Esnagami is on Lake Esnagami. They're the only fishing lodge on this massive, massive lake, Esnagami Lake. It's huge. It's by far my favorite fly-in fishing lodge in Ontario that I've been to. I'm sure there's other great ones, but this one is just like unbelievably good. It's run by a really nice family. Some of you might know them. The Lunds. Eric Lund is the owner and operator. He's incredible. Great angler. Super nice fella. And he built actually all of these buildings using trees from around the property like 30 years ago. So they've got this lodge really down to an art at this point. The experience is so thought through, amazing service. The cabins are really comfortable, but they still feel very Northern Ontario in a good way. You feel like you're out there on an adventure. Great food and unbelievable fishing. And thanks again for having me. Like, this has been super fun. I love talking about fishing in Ontario and just getting to, especially this time of year. So I love it.